It is impossible for one person to succeed in achieving everyone's ideal for a country. But when a person is able to unite over 125 million people into believing in one unified cause, that is when one has achieved greatness. Franklin D. Roosevelt has long been regarded as one of the greatest presidents in United States history. Franklin D. Roosevelt persuaded those 125 million people into believing in a unified cause. As stated by famous historian Robert Dallek, all great presidents have done something for their country. George Washington set the nation on its democratic path. Abraham Lincoln preserved it. Franklin D. Roosevelt saw the nation through depression and war. Franklin D. Roosevelt was the 32nd President of the United States of America and remains the only president to be elected for 4 terms. However, he suddenly died only about a year into his 4th term after suffering a cerebral hemorrhage stroke. Although his presidency was cut short, the effects he had on America were long-lasting. Franklin D. Roosevelt was born in Hyde Park, New York. Franklin D. Roosevelt was born to an upper-class family. He was an only child, although he did have a half-brother from his father's previous relationship. Growing up, Franklin D. Roosevelt was an average student. However, he did receive education from both Harvard and Columbia University. Franklin D. Roosevelt was inspired to get into politics after his 5th cousin, Theodore Roosevelt, was elected president in 1900. Franklin D. Roosevelt served as the New York Senator from 1910 to 1912 and the Secretary of the Navy from 1913 to 1919. Franklin D. Roosevelt then decided to run for vice presidency in 1920. However, his party ended up losing. In 1921, Franklin D. Roosevelt fell gravely ill due to a serious parasitic disease known as polio. Franklin D. Roosevelt was able to return to politics in 1929 when he became the New York governor, before finally running for presidency in 1932. Franklin D. Roosevelt, representing the Democratic Party, had an overwhelming win over Herbert Hoover, becoming the 32nd president. The first 100 days of Franklin D. Roosevelt's presidency was focused on countering the Great Depression. Franklin D. Roosevelt was inaugurated on March 4, 1933. This also happened to be one of the darkest hours of the Great Depression, as the stock market plummeted on Black Tuesday. In the first 100 days of his presidency, Franklin D. Roosevelt and his cabinet passed 15 major bills through Congress. Franklin D. Roosevelt was able to pass an emergency banking act that was able to reopen many of the recently closed banks. Franklin D. Roosevelt enacted the AAA, which was an act that would pay farmers to plant crops. Franklin D. Roosevelt backed many welfare projects, and he created jobs in the time of the Great Depression. Franklin D. Roosevelt's first 100 days of his presidency has long been regarded as the most impactful first 100 days of any presidency ever. However, his first 100 days of his presidency wasn't the only time he enacted new bills and rights to better his people and help thrive in a time of depression. On August 14, 1935, Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the Social Security Act. The Social Security Act enabled people who are of older age to have a pension. The act helped decrease poverty among elderly. Before the act, economical support for the elderly was more of a family issue. By taxing individuals' wages and employers' payrolls, it enabled the government to pay for the elderly. The act also provided funds to assist children, the blind, and the unemployed to receive necessary training and provide family health programs. Prior to the Social Security Act, the elderly routinely faced the prospect of poverty upon retirement. For the most part, the fear was now dissipated. Although the act was considered less progressive than other Western countries, it was the first time in history that the federal government had shown any type of care or sympathy towards the elderly. As said by Franklin D. Roosevelt, the test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much, it is whether we provide enough for those who have too little. After the Great Depression finally ended in 1939, the rest of the world was thrust into World War II. Even after the war broke out in Europe, following Hitler's invasion of Poland in 1939, Roosevelt, like he always did, was a man of the people and reflected national sentiment by maintaining U.S. neutrality. U.S. neutrality in World War II ended after the Japanese, who were allied with Nazi Germany, launched a surprise attack on Hawaii's Pearl Harbor. Addressing the situation in a national radio address the following day, President Roosevelt declared the date of that attack, December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. Roosevelt took a main leadership role, acting as the commander-in-chief. He built a close partnership with British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and later with Soviet Prime Minister Joseph Stalin in the fight against Nazi Germany. True to his word, the United States did become the arsenal of democracy, supplying some $50 billion in desperately needed weapons and equipment to the British, Soviets, and other Allied forces during the war. In his January 1941 State of the Union address, often called the Four Freedom Speech, Roosevelt cast the war as a fight for four universal human freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. Although Franklin D. Roosevelt was unable to live to see the end of the war, through his efforts the Allies were able to successfully beat the Axis powers on September 2, 1945. In conclusion, Franklin D. Roosevelt's actions and decisions helped guide America into the right direction and turn them into a positive economic and social powerhouse. Through his efforts of finding the Great Depression, creating bills and acts to support his citizens, and by leading America through World War II, Franklin D. Roosevelt was able to unify a nation and make them believe in a common goal. Although his presidency was unfortunately cut short, his effects on America continue to be felt to this day, and he will always be remembered as one of the greatest presidents of all time.